You're listening to the podcast of Iris Josephina. If you're passionate about exploring the menstrual cycle, cyclical living, body wisdom, personal growth, spirituality, and running a business in alignment with your natural cycles, you're in the right place. I'm Iris. I'm an entrepreneur, functional hormone specialist, trainer, and coach, and I'm on a mission to share insights, fun facts, and inspiration I discover along the way as I run my business and walk my own path on Earth. Here, you'll hear my personal stories, guest interviews, and vulnerable shares from clients and students. Most people know me from Instagram, where you can find me under @CycleSeeds, or they have been a coaching client or student in one of my courses. I'm so grateful you're here. Let's dive into today's episode. Hey loves, welcome to a new episode of the Inner Rhythms podcast. Today, I would love to talk about something that so many of us carry, often in silence, and that is shame. And I particularly want to talk about how it weaves itself into our experience with our menstrual cycles, but also more aspects of our cyclical continuum. So our coming of age, our first periods, cervical fluids, being pregnant, having body changes while pregnant, giving birth, all of these are connected. And it often starts with coming of age. Shame is such a strong emotion. It's sticky. It clings to our body. It clings to our psyche. And it's a very misunderstood emotion. So I want to talk about this because I was thinking about this so much, and I've had some clients who are well in their 30s and they are still living under the heavy, heavy cloak of shame. And so I want to talk about this with you because I know it's a feeling that many of us have had in their lives. And maybe you are at a point in your life where you're like, oh, I've overcome my shame. And we can experience shame in different layers. We can experience shame about experiences that we had that we didn't have control over. We can have shame about our body functions, about our behaviors. And I just want to take a moment to completely unpack that with all of you. And hopefully this episode can help you understand your experience of shame and how you can potentially overcome it, or at least develop a sense of compassion for it. So I want to begin with sharing with you and explaining what is shame really. And I want to start by saying that shame is different from guilt. So guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame, on the other hand, says, I am something wrong. And this is why shame is such a heavy feeling. It doesn't just sit in our thoughts and our heads, but it also wraps itself almost like around our identity. And when you feel shame, you are no longer in connection with the truth of who you are. Let that sink in. You are seeing yourself through the distorted mirror of someone else's judgment, someone else's expectation, or someone else's projection. And shame is taught behavior. It's learned behavior. It's something that develops within us in reaction and relationship to our environment and the people around us. And I often say shame only exists in relation to the outside world. It cannot live in isolation. And it's basically coming to life when we place ourselves against the eyes or standards of others. And it's really on the lowest of lowest end of frequency and vibration that we can be in with ourselves when it comes to connection. We completely lose connection with who we are, the truth of who we are and ourselves when we are in the vibration of shame. Now, there is different types of shame that we can experience, and I want to unpack those with you so that you can start to recognize it in yourself. And I really want to differentiate between a healthy, short-lived shame that is basically a teacher versus toxic shame. So I want to name that shame isn't always quote unquote bad. And when we look at healthy shame, it's more like a humility. It reminds us of our humanness, our limitations. It's the part of us that recognizes, oh, I did something wrong, and I feel a bit of shame around that, but I can shift my reaction or my behavior and make it better. So, for example, an example of my own life is that I was in my grandmother's house and there was like this beautiful vase that we had, and I knew it was really important to my grandma, and I knocked it over. And I felt so bad. And I felt both feelings of guilt and also shame. Because the guilt in that moment said, oh, I did something wrong. My grandma told me I couldn't drop this vase, and that's what I did. And the shame inside me went immediately to, you're a wrong person. There's something wrong with you. You can't follow through. And I made it about my identity, about my personality, as something was inherently wrong with me. In this situation, the only thing that was important was the guilt part. Oh, I did something wrong, and I can shift my behavior. I can apologize to my grandma. We can find mending and repair in that. And of course, her response was like very important for that. And she said, okay, I told you not to do that, but it was an accident, and it's okay. I forgive you. So this is an example where we can feel short-lived, healthy shame, and healthy shame is often followed by healthy repair, so that we can feel like, oh, there isn't inherently something wrong with me. There was something in my behavior that was not okay, but I can change that. I can mend, I can repair, I can forgive, I can be forgiven. And, I need others to repair from that. And another example is when you realize you spoke harshly to a loved one. That little flush of like, oh shit, I could have handled that better. And then be pulled back into integrity, back into relationship, and going into the repair after it happened, and forgive or be forgiven. And this is healthy shame. In healthy shame, there is a potential for reconnection. And when we experience healthy shame, it's always followed by a reconnection and a repair. When we look at toxic shame, is where shame becomes a core identity. It can be, for example, a child who grows up constantly being told, you're too much, you're a burden, and the child doesn't just learn to change a behavior, they actually internalize the belief that they are the problem. And toxic shame can also exist when the outside world makes us feel shame for who we are. And when we open this up and focus on who we are as cyclical people, as women, as people with menstrual cycles, our environment has culturally decided that there is a specific type of value placed on what it means to have a menstrual cycle. And thank God it's changing, but the long-standing narrative around the menstrual cycle is that it's something that we actually shouldn't be having. It's something that needs to be tucked away. It's something that can be in the open. But the thing is, this is a bodily function that you have zero control about. It belongs to your human experience, and you are shamed for that. The same goes for when people are shamed for their gender identity or their sex, for that matter. And once we internalize shame at that level, it really sits at the lowest vibration of human experience because we identify with it. We make it part of our identity because our environment around us has projected onto us that something about who we are as a human being is inherently not okay. Now, let me take this a little bit deeper into the menstrual cycle. So, how many of us were taught to hide pads or tampons up our sleeves on the way to the bathroom? How many of us were told not to talk about bleeding, or were told that PMS symptoms made us crazy or too emotional? This really is shame in action. It says this natural process in your body is dirty. You having this body process makes you less worthy. Don't speak of it. Don't show it. This is toxic shame. And it really severs us from our cyclical power, from the wisdom of our body, from the ancestral knowing that our menstruation is sacred. And, healthy shame in this context might look like, oh, okay, I snapped at my partner in the depths of my luteal phase. That wasn't aligned with how I wanted to show up, but I'm aware of where I am in my cycle and I can mend this. However, when we look at toxic shame in this situation, it would look like a loved one saying to you, you're impossible to love when you're like this. You'll always be too much. You feel the difference. One part invites into connection, and the other one cuts it off. Now, from an energetic perspective, shame really vibrates at the lowest frequency. Shame is below anger, it sits below fear, it sits below grief. And when we are in the emotion and the vibration of shame, we are completely out of integrity with ourselves because we have abandoned our own truth, our own very truthful experience. And to keep the example of the menstrual cycle real, we have completely abandoned the truth of our body that bleeds for the illusion of how we should be in the eyes of another. And this is why shame feels so isolating. It disconnects us not only from others, but it most deeply disconnects us from ourselves. And this is why the antidote to shame is always connection. Connection to truth, connection to compassion, connection to your body, connection to community. And this is also why when I notice in my clients that shame shows up inside of them, that I help them guide them back to connection with themselves, connection to their body. Because when you are out of connection with yourself, it is absolutely impossible to connect with another human being. It cannot exist. Because when you abandon yourself through shame, there is no way for you to show up in integrity and connect truthfully to someone else. And I understand. And when I was working with this, and I've been working with this for so long, and I completely unraveled my whole shame story and my shame experience. And it's very confronting because when you start to realize, holy fuck balls, I have abandoned myself for so long, it's very hurtful. It's very, very painful to come to the realization that by falling prey to shame and allowing ourselves to keep going there, we have denied ourselves true connection to ourselves. And it's a very, very painful thing to go through. And I understand it. I've been through it, and it hurts. It really, really hurts. And especially if you start realizing, and this is how it was for me, realizing and, remembering how you felt when you were just a little girl or just a little child, going through something and feeling this big feeling of shame and feeling completely alone and isolated and disconnected. Like, it's painful when you realize this about your younger self. Like, I cried such deep sadness about this when I realized, like, oh my God, like little Iris has felt so disconnected and so alone from herself and her community and her family and her parents and her friends when she was so deep in the gutters of shame. And it hurts. And I feel shame is one of the most hurtful feelings that we can experience as a human being because it's completely isolating. And it's scary to feel like that because as humans, we are wired to connect. And when we feel completely out of connection, it's such a scary feeling. It makes you feel like you're the only person in the world and nobody understands you. You're on your own. And it's so painful. And it's such a painful vibration and frequency to be in. And I want to, bring this to the surface and also let you know, like, you're not alone in experiencing this. And I also let you know that it's possible to mend this within yourself and to recognize when you fall into the pattern of shame. And it can happen very suddenly because many of us have a lot of like shame experiences when we were younger, when our brains were like naturally wired. So usually, and unfortunately, these patterns of shame are like very deep and we've developed them from a very young age. So they're very hard to break as well. But I do want you to know that it's possible. And when I work with my clients and shame comes up, like, we do very deep work around it because I feel it's so, so important to understand the mechanism of shame and also the difference between guilt, healthy shame, and toxic shame, so that we can start identifying when this is projected onto us. And so I want to lovingly invite you to do some reflections in your own life. Like, where in your life or where in your cycle or where in your cyclical continuum does shame show up, or where has it shown up in your life? And can you pinpoint what happens? And can you pinpoint what happens in your body when you feel shame? For me, shame feels like a complete dissociation with myself. Like, I lose the sense and awareness of time. I feel very lightheaded. I can't feel my arms and legs anymore. I feel a knot in my stomach, and I feel like I'm fading away from my body. And it's a very scary, isolating feeling. And it's painful. And the next thing I would love for you to reflect on is, can you discern if it is healthy shame or toxic shame, now that you know what that is? Is it the shame that kind of like humbles you into, better behavior and reconnects you? Or is it the kind that truly silences you and isolates you? And do you have the capacity to begin to bring curiosity, compassion, and connection to these experiences instead? And I really want to reiterate that you being in a cyclical body and having received the gift of this type of reproductive system is not shameful. It's life itself moving through you. Your cycle can literally be your compass. And when we reconnect with this part of ourselves, we can feel our power. And my personal belief is also that shame is a tool. It's a tool from oppressors. It's a tool from organizations and governments and societies where they want to have control over you. Because when you are in the lowest vibration that the human body can be in, which is shame, it is very easy to control. It's very easy to control you when you are in a energy of shame. This is also why, when we experience sexual trauma or intense, boundary crossings, the perpetrator will always try to make you feel shame. And when you're not trained or aware about the fact that shame is the lowest frequency we can be in, and it's the place where people can easily control you, it's very easy to spiral into it and feel very isolated and feel very disconnected so that others can have power over you. When shame doesn't exist, or when you are aware that there is shame and you mend it and you constantly are able to reconnect with yourself, you connect with your power, you connect with your integrity, you connect with your authenticity, you connect with your own inner truth. Nobody can have control over you because it's the part of you where you can feel the most connected. Like when we feel the most connected and at ease with ourselves, we can feel our boundaries. When you are in shame, your boundaries become very blurry because you dissociate from your body and also your mind and your thoughts and your perception of where your boundaries are. So an important part of my work, especially with my one-to-one clients, is about, have you worked with your shame? How is shame shown up in your life and in your body and in your cyclical continuum? Are you aware what kind of shame it is? And can you come back to connection with yourself? And I really feel that in all of the work that I do, repairing connection to self and our bodies is one of the most powerful things that we can do. Because when we never leave ourselves behind, other people cannot control us. The moment we leave ourselves behind, when we abandon our own truth for the illusion of how we should be in the eyes of another, we are always in our power. And I think this is one of the most important lessons I've learned in my life. And I have been feeling this strength within myself for a very long time. But I feel that when I started doing this work and unpacking this whole journey with myself, this has been the most important aspect, because when you unpack shame and when you repair and reconnect with yourself, you can also redefine everything that you've ever learned. You can start adjusting your belief systems. You can dive into like, okay, what do I believe about myself? And how much of what I believe about myself is actually a projection of others and not necessarily my own truth? So this is such powerful work. It's immensely powerful. And even I know that even me sharing about this has like things moving in your brain. When we talk about shame like this, and I've experienced this in groups with people, when someone starts unpacking the meaning of shame in front of you, this is where your process starts. And I know that everyone who listens to this podcast has this process started. And I know that you felt shame in your life. And I know that it has never been your most powerful experience of yourself because you've been disconnected from yourself when you're in shame. And I know that when I explain all this to people, things start shifting. Things start moving. There's an awareness that happens. And this is where the repair starts. You start to understand what shame is. You start to understand it's the lowest vibration and frequency we can be in as a human being. And we can work ourselves out of this. And the antidote to shame is always connection. Connection to truth, connection to compassion, connection to yourself, connection to your body, and connection to your community and your loved ones. And maybe even your purpose. And I would love for you to take a moment after you've listened to this episode to just journal or go on a walk and let all of this information sink in. And be in a place where you feel safe, where you feel connected, so that you can start relating to shame and your healing of shame from a place of connection. Thank you so much for, making it to the end of this episode. Thank you for being here with me today and being open to receive. I know this is a very difficult topic for many of us, and many of us run away from this topic. And if this resonated with you, share it with a friend who might also need to hear these words. And as always, my invitation is to stay connected. Stay connected to your own truth. Stay connected to your cycle. Stay connected to your body. And I will see you in the next episode. And please, if you feel like you want to share your experience with me about, you listening to this episode, feel free to drop me an email at info@cycleseeds.com. Send me a DM on Instagram over at @cycleseeds, or drop a comment below this episode, depending on where you're listening to it. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Okay, this wraps up today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Want to know more about me? The best way to reach me is via @cycleseeds on Instagram. And if you heard something today and you think, oh my God, wow, I learned something new, feel free to share the podcast on your social media and tag me, or leave a review or rating. In this way, you help me reach more people like you. Thank you so much.